Hi friends, this is Caitlin, and today I'm sharing with you a card that I made featuring the new Simon Says Stamp Snowflake Edges stamp set, which is absolutely gorgeous and I was so excited to work with. But I have to warn you that this was not an easy card to make. I had big reservations about even posting this video, but I think that it's important for us to share the times when crafting comes easy and also share the times when the crafting can be a little bit of a struggle and how we can kind of push through and make it work and problem solve so that we end up with a card that we love anyway. I was really excited to start playing and ink blending with the new Villainous Potion Distress Oxide ink. So I decided to do some heat embossing and some ink resist for this card, letting the white of the snowflakes kind of pop out against those darker inks. I want to give you fair warning now if my audio sounds a little different than it normally does. It's because I'm recording this voiceover from the car. My mom and I are on a little road trip across the East Coast and we're having so much fun, but you know, videos got to get posted on Friday. So here I am doing my voiceover next to my mom, looking at all these pretty fall leaves. So to start out this card, I die cut my main panel with the My Favorite Things stitch rectangle dies. And I'm going in with that corner snowflake edge and lining it up so that the corner fits right up against those stitch lines. And I went in with the Versamark Watermark clear ink, which is nice and sticky. And I did decide to do a clear embossing powder, and I wish now that I hadn't. I wish I had used white, because after I ink blend and wipe everything off, the snowflakes don't pop through as bright white as I wish they had, and I really think that using a white embossing ink would have fixed that problem for me. One thing that did work out really well was leaving my stamp on my Misti so that all I had to do was rotate my card panel around the other way, and then I could go in and stamp my second one perfectly in that other corner so that the stamps are opposite of each other, and that worked out really good. I didn't have to worry about relining anything up. Now this next thing is where I started to go a little rogue. I'm stamping my Versamark ink straight onto this scrap piece of white cardstock, and I'm going in with this Snowflake tinsel embossing powder. It's a really cool glitter embossing powder that I got last year and I never really had the chance to use, and so I decided I wanted to do some die cut snowflakes on this card as accents, and we'll get to more of the die cutting process later and how I kind of had to make that little panel work. Now I'm going in with my Villainous Potion and a small blending brush from Simon Says Stamp and just working in little circles, building up my color, and I'm trying to create a lighter layer as I'm going up the panel so that when I overlap it with that prize ribbon, it gets a really nice blend. And because there is so much blue tone in that Villainous Potion, making that blend really smooth was very easy, especially with these oxide inks. I really like the way that the salvage patina that I add to what will be the top of the panel help to kind of lighten up and brighten up the whole thing, but these two first deeper colors are just so beautiful. When I started going in with the salvage patina, I did grab a full stick post-it note to use under my fingers just so that I didn't get any fingerprints or smear my colors, which you'll see becomes a very ironic later on because I end up smearing a lot of colors anyway. I do have a few of these smaller Simon Says Stamp brushes, and I only use them for my oxide inks, and that way I don't end up mixing my oxides and my regular distress inks. I'm pretty sure you can just clean the brushes off well in between, but I find it's easier to just keep them in a little container where I keep my distress oxides, and that way I know that those just go for those ink pads. So there you can see on the top of that panel, I used a damp paper towel to wipe off my extra ink, and I created a huge smear over that purple section. And also because of the direction I was wiping, I bled the purple and the darker blue down into my salvage patina. So then I thought to myself, well, I'll just cover it up by adding some splotches. So I added clear, clean water, and then I absolutely hated it. So then I decided that it would be better and more contrast if I went in with the Villainous Potion spray stain and added some droplets of that, and then I also hated that. So now I have a white and dark speckly smeared mess of a panel that I absolutely hated, and this is where I almost threw the whole thing in the garbage and deleted this video and went to bed. But instead, I decided to try to see what would happen if I did an extra layer of ink blending over the top of everything to kind of mute and even everything out. And in the end, it definitely did work. I still am not 100% in love with how the Villainous Potion speckles look against the Salvage Patina, but overall, once the other snowflakes and the sentiment are in place, I think it came together okay. So the second time I went through to wipe off the extra ink, I made sure that my paper towel was barely damp by just spraying a light mist of water into the air and then waving my paper towel into it. And when I wiped the ink off of the embossing, I wiped it in the same direction that the ink was already blended so that there wouldn't be any smearing or overlapping, and that worked out much better for me. So I took that little square of glitter embossed cardstock and I die cut the Marie Snowflake from Simon Says Stamp out of it, and it definitely got a little bit stuck. So you can see I'm just kind of working the edges all the way around so that I don't tear it. I went in with an X-Acto knife, which probably wasn't the safest idea, but it worked out fine. You could probably also use like a pokey tool or one of those cool brushes that are out there that you can like scrape over the dies, but I don't have one of those yet. I might be needing to get one for Christmas though. So once I pulled the snowflake from the die, I decided that I also hated it. It looked patchy, the glitter wasn't super pretty, it just looked weird. And then I made this possibly fatal mistake of using my ink pad directly on it, and you could see a ton of glitter transferred onto my ink pad. So I might be needing to get a new Versamark ink pad now, but that's okay. So once I had inked it up, I put on the same clear embossing powder I used earlier onto the top of the glitter, and once I heat embossed it a second time with the clear, it looked so smooth and glossy and beautiful with the glitter that I 100% saved it. I also grabbed the Holiday Wishes sentiment from the stamp set, and I'm using the Villainous Potion oxide ink again just to stamp out that sentiment on a scrap piece of thin white paper that I ended up trimming down. And now I'm going in to make my card base, which is just a standard A2 size card, which is 5.5 by 4.25, and this one is top folding. I thought that would be really pretty to line up with the direction of my panel. I knew going into this that I really wanted there to be a bright white border around my main panel, and so that's why I used that stitch rectangle die from My Favorite Things earlier to cut it out. And that way that white border just helps to kind of ground all of the heat embossing, and it also ties in really nicely with that sentiment strip. Because this strip is so plain and I didn't make it a shape or give it a little fishtail or anything like that, the white on white just helps to kind of tie everything together. Originally, I thought I wanted my sentiment coming out from the snowflake die cut, but once I lined everything up and was playing around with placement, I realized that really wasn't going to work with how lacy that snowflake is. So I ended up trimming down that sentiment strip so that it fit right in between the heat embossing and gluing it right down in the center. And then I started playing around with different ways that I could cut my snowflake so that everything would fit together and it would fill in those spaces on the opposite corners from my heat embossing. I started out by cutting my snowflake directly down the center, and I did edit out the footage, but I also almost chopped off my thumb in the process because I wasn't being careful about where I was putting my hand when placing my paper in my guillotine trimmer. So make sure you're being really careful about that. I've never been so grateful for acrylic nails in my whole life, and lesson was very much learned, and I will be extremely careful before I pull down the blade on my paper cutter in the future. For the bottom right-hand corner snowflake, I just held up the snowflake and marked it with a pencil of where it would fit in the corner, and then just trimmed that with regular scissors. And then for that top section, I realized that I could just trim off the top and the bottom little pieces that were hanging off, and it would fit perfectly up in that corner. So they're not exactly symmetrical, but it all flows really well and creates this beautiful frame all the way around the card. To glue these down, I just used teeny tiny little dots of liquid glue all the way around all the edges. These are so dainty and frilly. I really wanted to make sure they all stuck to the paper, but I didn't want giant globs of glue coming from underneath. And that top left snowflake also helped to cover up some of those darker Villainous Potion splotches that I didn't love, which was a nice way to cover it up. So for that bottom right hand corner snowflake, a tiny piece had trimmed off that I really wanted to include. So I glued down the main snowflake piece and then just added a tiny dot of glue to that extra little bit. And once it's all glued down, I really think you can't tell that it got cut off, and I think it looks great. Then I grabbed, for embellishments, one of my absolute all-time favorites, which is the Dreamy Days Embellishment Sequin Mix from Possum Stamps. I love this mix. It's so gorgeous. As usual, placing my embellishments was not easy. I feel like I struggle with these sequins so much, but I really thought that even with the glitter of the snowflakes, that this card could benefit from an extra little bit of bling. So once I played around with them and found an arrangement I was happy with, I glued them down with little dots of that same precision glue. And after everything was said and done, I really am happy with how this card turned out. Thank you so much for coming to hang out with me today. I really hope that you're feeling inspired, and if nothing else, I hope that the next time that it feels like your crafting is going awry, that you think of me and you try to get creative and problem solve and see if you can fix it instead of just throwing it in the trash. So thank you again for being here. I hope you have a great weekend and happy crafting.